Hello and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us today for RPIC's Lunch and Learn entitled How the Energy as a Service Model Helped Fund Canada's First Carbon Neutral School. My name is Danny Gruner and I will be your host for today. I am the Western Regional Service Line Leader for Real Property Management at Defence Construction Canada. I am also a long-standing volunteer with RPIC, and I have been involved with the planning and delivery of many previous workshops and webinars. As I am hosting this webinar from Edmonton today, I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada. And I invite you to take a moment to reflect on where you are today as you're participating in this webinar. The Real Property Institute of Canada, RPIC, is an organization with the primary goal of developing and fostering a high professional standard of real property management within the federal public sector, and to provide a forum for information exchange and continuous improvement. RPIC provides a forum for networking opportunities to seek expert advice, and as we are doing here today, providing training and career development through workshops, training sessions, and seminars. Our professional development programming would not be possible without the support of our generous sponsors. Thank you to our annual sponsors, our public sector sustaining partner, PSPC, our private sector sustaining partners, Colliers Project Leaders, Tyree, Facility Solutions, and Horizon Inc., and our private sector supporting partners, AECOM and the Canada Lands Company. Today's webinar is brought to you by Ameresco Canada. Before we begin our presentation, I want to briefly go over a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and a playback link will be sent to the email that you provided to register for this webinar. The recording will also be posted on the RPIC website following the webinar. For the live Q&As, please use the question button in the bottom center of your screen to submit your questions to the presenters, and we will try to address as many of those as possible during the session today. If at any point throughout the webinar you're experiencing technical difficulties, please use the chat function and message tech support, and someone will be able to assist you. Let's start today's session off with a few quick polls. You should be seeing the first one on your screen now. And we are wondering what your primary language preference is. So we'll just give folks a few minutes to answer that. And the second second poll that is up on your screen now as well is where you are tuning in from today. Okay, I think we can close that poll. So it looks like we have a predominant English audience today, and the majority of folks are joining us in from Ontario with representation from quite a few of the other provinces as well. So that's great. I will now pass it on to Catherine Dallaire. She's the Vice President of Programming with RPIC to moderate the session. She will introduce today's speakers. Catherine recently transitioned her consulting career to the federal service. She's the Acting Director for the Innovative Delivery Strategies at PSPC. Over to you, Catherine.
Merci beaucoup, Dani. Avant de débuter notre présentation, permettez-moi de vous fournir juste quelques précisions. En ce qui a trait aux séances de questions-réponses, veuillez utiliser le bouton questions situé au bas de votre écran au centre afin de les soumettre au présentateur. Aussi, veuillez noter que ce webinaire est enregistré. Un hyperlien pour accéder à l'enregistrement vous sera envoyé dans les jours qui suivent à l'adresse courriel que vous avez utilisée pour vous inscrire à cet événement de l'IBIC. L'enregistrement sera aussi affiché sur le site web de l'IBIC si jamais vous souhaitez un peu partager ceci avec vos collègues qui peuvent peut-être bénéficier de ce qu'on va traiter aujourd'hui lors du webinaire. Alors, commençons sans plus tarder. Donc, the presenters for today are John Kononyuk and Jim Funger. John Kononyuk is the Executive Manager of Facilities at the John Paul II Catholic Secondary School within the London District Catholic School Board. John is currently responsible for all aspects of the 53 educational facilities within the London District Catholic School Board. With over 34 years of leadership in school board facility management, John is responsible for the development of new school construction, major school additions and renovations, energy conservation management programs, as well as the procurement of all energy-related commodities. John has managed $200 million in new school construction and $21 million in energy performance contracts, with the sole objective to reduce the board's energy-related budget costs. Jim Fonger is the Vice President of Asset and Advanced Technology Development at Ameresco Canada. As VP of Asset and Advanced Technology Development, Jim is responsible for all distributed energy resource and other asset development and deployment in Canada. Recently, he developed groundbreaking distributed energy resource projects, including the one at the John Paul II Catholic Secondary School carbon-free microgrid project, the one we're going to hear about today during this webinar. Today's discussion, now it will be moderated by my colleague Maxime Saint-Denis, who will help demonstrate how the energy as a service concept is relevant in a federal context to help advance the implementation of the greening of government strategy. Maxime is the National Manager of Climate Action, GHG and Energy at PSPC. He's a mechanical engineer and that in 2015 moved over to the National Center of Expertise at PSPC Real Property Services to relaunch the departmental climate change program. Max has advanced transformational initiatives that are changing the way PSPC incorporates climate mitigation and climate adaptation consideration in everyday business decisions and processes. One such area that has benefited is the federal buildings initiatives, where PSPC now incorporates enhanced GHG reduction considerations as part of energy performance contracting. Now, the goals for this webinar, we are focused on professional development at RPIC. I want to be clear that the goals we've established for this is to teach you how the energy as a service model relates to targets in the greening of government strategy, how to approach the first steps in your energy neutrality journey, then also how the energy as a service financing model will allow similar campuses than what we're going to hear from the school board to adopt renewable energy in an economically viable way. And lastly, how a complex project seemingly far beyond a facility's budget can be completed through flexible funding and adaptation. Now, before I hand it over to Maxime, we'd like to do another poll with you all. Let's just check in with, just to get a better understanding of your knowledge of energy performance contracting. So how familiar are you with this concept, energy performance contracting? And then also, while we're at it, have you ever been involved in an energy performance contract in your career so far? Now's probably a good time to look at the results. These are quick questions to answer. Thank you everyone for taking the time. So some people in the audience, a third of you have a very familiar understanding, so you'll probably benefit from hearing about a case study and another experience in another jurisdictions, but seems like a good portion are somewhat familiar or still have maybe quite still lots to learn on the concept. So this webinar will help with that. And half of you, or almost half, 40% have been involved in a project before. Great to see there's so much capacity, but still over close to 60% of folks in the room do not have that experience yet. So I'll now pass it on to Max, who can then really kind of put this into that context, this concept in the federal government context, and then we'll hear from John and Jim.
Merci beaucoup, Catherine. I just want to make sure people can see my screen. So I switched over. So I see Catherine saying yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for joining us. So my goal is really kind of introduce, what we've been doing in government with energy performance contracting, and I think some of the changes that have occurred over the recent years because of the greening government strategy. So my goal is to do a quick introduction to help inform the community as to what's going on in the federal government, and really leave the time for John and Jim to really present the case study of the initiative. So let's see here, we're going to move over to the next slide here. So I just want to give sort of an overview of energy performance contracting in terms of what we've done. So the federal government program was initiated in 1992, and the real purpose was to reduce energy waste and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It was at a time when there was tremendous opportunity for investment for reducing the government's energy intensity in its buildings, but it was also a time when we didn't have much capital money available to be able to do those type of investments. So some policy changes were done on the contracting side to allow government departments to actually access third-party financing. So energy service companies, and that's really critical. So the ESCO community back in 1992 was really at its infancy in Canada, very developed in the United States, but it's something that we saw an opportunity to be able to leverage to help us do those investments while not necessarily having the capital available to us. So it involves specialized private sector energy service companies performing renovations that replace existing outdated building systems with new energy efficient technologies. So it's really about making that building more efficient. And like I mentioned, so those ESCOs can provide third-party financing. This is a critical piece. And I think John and Jim will talk about this innovative access to capital to be able to do these type of innovative projects. And what's interesting is the payments are recovered through the result building energy savings, the result in building energy savings. So it's really important. So you can get investments done, and the service contract is about really getting to pay back that service provider through the savings that they're generating through the investments. And another key piece is that these are energy performance contracts. Okay, so you really go into this not necessarily with a defined scope, like you have to change a boiler. It's really about having these companies come in and look at the opportunity available, and for them, with their innovative look at things, to come and propose some interesting project proposals. So that's the overview. In terms of the history, specific to PSPC, PSPC began these projects in 1993 with adaptations to the contract model over the years to improve selection criteria. So it's continuous improvement on our contractual documentation based on lessons learned and the interactions we've had over the last 25 years with industry. We have delivered 30 energy performance contracts to date over that 25-year period. Some of these contracts involve multiple buildings, so you can't just look at it as 20 buildings. It could have been a bundle of buildings. We've had a significant uptick in the interest of using the energy performance contracting model in recent years, and PSPC is currently managing 12 EPC projects at different stages of project delivery, not just for PSPC assets, but also for other government departments. We also have 9 new projects released this fiscal year. So this is 2020, 2021. So we've released, and we're in the process of releasing some more in 21, 22. And the contract model has been adjusted in recent years to respond to the green government strategy. And it's a critical piece. It's no longer about energy savings and an attractive payback. We also need to consider the impact of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to meet our Government of Canada and our country's commitments. So just to show you, doesn't want to change slides. There we go. So a real quick summary really of what Canada's response to climate change is, as it is a priority. So the 2020 speech from the throne was a critical one, and it really set the standard in terms of that we needed to exceed our 2030 climate goals, and that we were going to legislate net zero emissions by 2050. And this legislation is for Canada, not just government operations. I have to give a shout out to plastic. It's quite important as well when we talk about greening. It's all a sustainability. So we want to ban harmful single-use plastics by 2021. And a critical piece is applying nature-based solutions to fight climate change. So if you look at the budget that just came out last week, you're going to see a lot of the commitments for the investments in Canada around these 3 specific targets. And how has government responded to meet the speech from the throne is by developing what we call the Greening Government Strategy. It's the Treasury Board that has developed this, and it's really setting the policy and guidance as to what government operations need to do. And I want you to take focus really on those 4 bullets I'm about to talk before passing it on to John, is that when you talk about energy performance contracting and these specific targets I'm going to talk about, commitments, it really feeds in extremely well to what is going to be presented in this case study. So net zero carbon, green and climate resilient portfolio by 2050, 100% clean electricity by 2025. So Government Canada is committed to that. There are different ways of getting there, and this project is going to show one of the ways of getting there, an opportunity, as I call it. And a key piece now is the retrofits and energy performance contracts require life cycle cost analysis over 40 years. We are now making sure that we look at the total cost of ownership, what is best value to the taxpayer over the life of the project, not just the upfront cost. And Treasury Board has also introduced a shadow price on carbon at $300 a ton. I call it the environmental liability of inaction. If we don't remove the carbon today, it is a future cost to Canadians to be able to remove that at a future time. So there's an interest in removing it now. So on that note, I'd like to pass the presentation over to John and Jim to present the case study. I am very familiar with EPC models. This is innovative in the way it's being done, and I found it extremely interesting. So it doesn't matter where you are in the knowledge base in EPC, I think it's going to be extremely useful for the audience today.
Okay, thank you, Max. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you're located throughout the country. Okay, Jim, we'll move to the first slide. As you can see by the slide, the London District Catholic School Board is a medium-sized school board located in southwest Ontario. The Catholic Education Centre, which is our board's administration building, is located in London, Ontario, a city of some 375,000 people. Our 56 buildings consist of 43 elementary schools, 9 secondary schools, an adult education center, and a Catholic education center. Numerous school facilities are also complete with community daycares and family centers. Okay, we can move to the next one. Thank you, Jim. I'd just like to add a little bit to this slide about JP2. It's a 2-story school of some 134,500 square feet, and it sits on 22.6 acres of land. It is located at an intersection of 2 major roads in the City of London, which gives it an excellent presence of vehicular traffic as people go by, so they can see the transformation of the project from what it used to be like and what it is now. Next, Jim. The JP2 project components. Let me provide you with some background about JP2 before we started the transformation. The school was constructed with a very conventional HVAC system, which comprised of natural gas hot water boilers, cooling tower, and heat pumps. We completed a FEED study through Natural Resources Canada, and we were able to prove that with the use of conventional technology like in-ground geothermal system, newer technologies of solar, battery storage, advanced metering, and building automation, that we could attain our objective to convert JP2 into a carbon-free embedded utility. I'll now highlight some of the advanced technologies that were implemented into the school facility to meet the objectives of this project. The real-time circuit-level monitoring provided the ability for load balancing through submetering of the electrical systems. This allowed the ability to monitor the electrical equipment for energy consumption and optimization. The carport solar consists of bifacial panels, which allowed us to reduce the actual size of the solar array. The 625 solar array can produce more carbon-free energy that is required by the school, so that the extra energy produced can be put back into the local electrical utility grid system for revenue generation. The 1.1 megawatt lithium-ion storage battery also has a capacity of 2.2 megawatts consumption ability for a 2-hour period in case of emergency purposes. We incorporated electrical school bus charging system, as many of our third-party bus operators are now utilizing electrical buses. We included 3 standard EV charging stations that will be able to provide additional revenue for the project. The real-time perpetual commissioning involves detailed data monitoring and analytics that allows us to know exactly what circuit is doing what at any given moment. This feature also allows at any given moment the ability to make adjustments that are necessary and that are flagged by the analytics if equipment is not operating as expected, such as simply running too long or not running long enough according to the building automation system. The microgrid system is designed such that if necessary, due to inclement weather, which results in the solar arrays not producing enough electrical power for the school, we can download electrical power from the grid during the night when the cost of electrical energy is much more economical. With these new technologies, we have been able to convert an existing secondary school facility into a carbon-free embedded utility, and by the end of this month, we anticipate we will receive from both our municipal and provincial electrical utilities our notice of commercial operation as an official carbon-free embedded utility, the first not only in the province of Ontario, but in Canada. The whys of the project. Anytime one is considering a project the likes of JP2, consideration for the project has to include and determine what the benefits are. Over the past decade, electrical costs in Ontario have skyrocketed. Organizations like public school boards operate on prescriptive provincial funding from the Ministry of Education. As such, our school board looked as to how we could stabilize energy costs while minimizing unknown future energy costs that would impact our annual budget. In the case of JP2, Ameresco has now become our electricity supplier. We executed a 25-year agreement that includes a known nominal annual increase for electricity prices. The other costs which we looked at with the intent to minimize was the federal carbon tax, which was introduced in 2018 on fossil fuels. This tax, obviously, we all know is progressive, with known annual increases currently announced up to the year 2030. This year alone, the federal carbon tax increased by 33% in comparison to last year. We are currently paying now $40 per ton for carbon tax, and by the year 2030, that cost will rise to $170 per ton. So to have the ability to convert JP2 from a facility that operated on natural gas to electricity and avoid carbon taxes was a major factor in our school board moving forward with this project. Another aspect of this project that we felt was a major benefit was to demonstrate social leadership and responsibility to the students of the school, who in the near future will become the leaders in their community and abroad. One of the main points expressed by Natural Resources Canada was their desire that once JP2 was completed, it become a model as to how schools be built and operated by future school boards in the province of Ontario, as well as those across Canada. JP2 would also demonstrate that not only existing school facilities, but also new school buildings can become self-sustained, carbon-free microgrid systems. Another factor that Natural Resources Canada looked for was what would be the benefit to the local community if JP2 became a self-sustained carbon-free microgrid system. Well, we probably all can remember back in 2003, the province of Ontario, as well as other Canadian provinces, including parts of the US, experienced a major failure in the infrastructure of their electrical grid system. In the province of Ontario, many communities remained without electrical power for extended time period, which lasted well in excess of a week. Having a self-sustained facility like JP2 in the City of London can provide families in times of emergency a place of refuge whereby they can remain safe, be fed, and kept comfortable. As you can see, there are many benefits to a project like JP2, not only from a cost-saving point of view, but also provide the ability to create new revenue streams by producing additional electrical power that can be returned to the municipal electrical grid. From a leader and social perspective, these types of projects, as we have proven, are attainable while reducing an organization's carbon footprint as it relates to climate change. JP2 and why Ameresco? Ameresco brought the idea of the JP2 carbon project to our board. Natural Resources Canada was accepting some 100 applications for renewable, carbon reduction, green energy projects, and would pick three out of these submissions that met their requirement. We were fortunate to be one of the three chosen projects. Our board has had a long-term relationship with Ameresco since 1994. Together, we've completed many energy savings projects over the years to reduce our annual operating commodity budgets, as well as reducing our carbon footprint. Ameresco was responsible for making the JP2 project viable in terms of execution and capital financing. I'll now turn it over to Jim Fonger.
Thank you, John. As the guy who reminded everyone before they spoke to unmute themselves, I forgot, but that's okay. Great summary of the project, and it's been great working with John over the past 3 years to bring this to fruition. And just to emphasize, one of the things that John mentioned is we're actually just going through the commissioning process of the school right now. But one of the interesting things from a technical standpoint, just for a variety of reasons I won't get into, but we were actually able to commission this project in off-grid mode without actually being connected to the London Hydro grid. So now we've actually confirmed that it works in both modes, and hopefully May 1st will be our commercial operation date for this exciting project. As Max mentioned earlier, the federal government has been involved in energy performance contracts for a long time, and Ameresco, as just through demonstration of that, has been a major player and has had the opportunity to provide many of the solutions for the federal government at many different levels over this time period. And we certainly hope to continue that and possibly under some new models moving forward to accelerate the country's move to carbon-free. And just so all of you know, for those of you who aren't familiar with Ameresco, since our company went public back in 2010, corporately keeping track of carbon emission reductions for our customers has been a key measurement of performance inside our company. And Ameresco continues to work on this and to provide solutions to our customers that really now get focused on reducing their carbon footprint. One of the things that I really wanted to mention today, before getting into the financial architecture of the project that John went through, is Ameresco's difference in terms of how we approach the market. One of the things that companies are trying to do in terms of getting carbon free is they're taking two approaches. One approach is to try and find energy projects that are in the field, large wind projects, large solar projects, opportunities to basically fund development projects that we'll call transmission grade and actually get that energy into the load center. That's one approach that some are taking. What Ameresco is taking and what we have as our, we'll call it architectural differentiator in terms of how we approach this, is we like customers to look at their loads first. The most efficient, cheapest way to get renewable energy to a site is to actually have that renewable energy on site, which means you're avoiding all of the cost of the distribution, and transmission infrastructure to get that load to where it's required. And this is one of the great things that JP2 exemplifies. John mentioned earlier, and how we look at projects is when we're putting renewable energy on site at projects, it isn't just about what that facility needs. It's about what that facility needs, plus what it can also provide for the local community around it in terms of excess power. And in John's case, for his school board, and actually what we can do is, while it's not something that we built inside of the project, there are some extra environmental attributes that project will contribute to the board's other schools as a result of it producing excess on-site energy. And that's certainly something we hope that the federal government looks at in terms of ways to approach how we can get to carbon neutral in the years ahead. So there's many things that are facing organizations right now. And for those of you who are involved in RPIC and working on these projects yourselves, you'll recognize many of the things that are on the screen today are really significant challenges in terms of how we move forward, especially in today's pandemic. And hopefully that's going to be behind us very soon. But the economic model that you're about to see here today is an opportunity for you to address all of these things in terms of deferred maintenance backlog, carbon reduction targets, resiliency for your facilities. Of course, there's a generational change in staff that's happening right now. The expertise that people have had are starting to retire out of the system, and it's complicated to try and replace that expertise as new projects come online. And then, of course, there's our new normal that we have to face based on what's happening in COVID. So in terms of an energy as a service structure, it was great to see the poll. Some of you are familiar with basic performance contracting. Some of you don't seem to have the knowledge of that. So just a very brief overview for it. What typical performance contracting does is look at a project, find a way to bring renewal to that project in terms of what it's required. And the capital cost to fund that renewal is actually paid for by the savings from that project. And on the left-hand side of this slide you're looking at now, the typical performance contract is outlined, where basically what Ameresco does is provide guaranteed savings to the client, so that when the initial study on that project was completed, the savings that are actually discovered during that process are guaranteed to the client in order to return the savings, the revenue that actually services the capital for that project. Ameresco absorbs the design and performance risk. And what our clients do is we help that financial institution that basically brings the capital to the project. We help our clients find that financing, but that financing relationship is with the client, but it's backed up by Ameresco. So in a typical performance contract, there is a direct relationship between yourselves and that financial institution, but the savings are backed up by Ameresco. In the energy as a service arrangement, that really changes. Ameresco is really responsible for everything in the project. It's responsible for the performance of the project in terms of what it's providing. And in this case, as Max mentioned earlier, it's not just the savings that we guarantee, it's actually any savings, any carbon reductions, and the performance of the facility itself in terms of, is lighting being supplied as it should be? Is HVAC providing the right temperature with the right humidity? Are CO2 levels in the building what they need to be? So all of those things are basically built into this new energy as a service contract. And in terms of the capital, the total capital that's brought to the project, that's actually organized by Ameresco itself. And what the client is responsible for is paying a standard service fee to Ameresco, providing all of those services are delivered as required on a monthly basis. And then Ameresco is responsible for delivering that in its entirety over that structure. So for the federal government, or for many other clients that we're working with, the balance sheet impact of these kinds of projects is important. And energy as a service, just as performance contracting, can be an off-balance sheet structure for organizations to move forward on decarbonization. And that's one of the things that we're really trying to help clients both in the public sector and the private sector get to, is the government has identified, along with the rest of the world, that getting off carbon is something we have to do now, and we have to get on with it with each of our projects. So what we're trying to find is ways for companies to be able to use their capital as they need it for their core business. And what Ameresco does is to bring the capital that's required to these projects through an energy as a service model, so that they can be paid for over the long term, and that they, in best cases, won't affect your balance sheet. And if we can, to make sure that the operational costs that you have now are certainly left where they're at. In the best cases, we can save that, or if it needs to increase in order to get after these carbon reductions, it's as minimal as possible. So earlier we talked about JP2 specifically on the financing side. John mentioned several times Natural Resources Canada. We want to thank Natural Resources Canada for making this project possible. One of the things that we did in the FEED study that John mentioned was to basically look at, with the cost of energy rising, with the cost of carbon rising moving forward, and the cost of equipment that comes into these types of projects actually reducing. At what point in the future would a project like this not need the help that Enercan brought to this project forward? After all, as a demonstration project, if it couldn't happen by itself in the future without government funding, this would not be a viable solution for customers to be able to take in a sustainable way. So it was important for us to be able to identify, when does this project actually go in field and can be economic without any subsidies? And what that model found was, at some point in 2024, in terms of constructing these projects, this all on its own will be a project that can happen by itself. And what's interesting is, as Ameresco actually brought the project forward, is what we found is many of those cost savings that we had estimated, or equipment savings that we had estimated, some of those started to decline as we got more and more quotes from both equipment suppliers and from contractors that were working on the project. So it's definitely going in the direction that we need it to. However, one of the things was, energy as a service contracts, especially when you're looking at microgrids, is not quite as easy to get financed as your typical renewable project. So in addition to some of the funding assistance we got from Enercan at the beginning of this project, Ameresco had to basically take this whole thing on itself from an equity standpoint in order to get it funded. But that too has changed, with all of the focus now that's moving forward on capital, that's moving towards green projects, some of the programs that are putting in place, and for the private sector, organizations like the Canadian Infrastructure Bank that's basically bringing low interest, long-term financing to projects like this. The reality of them in terms of being able to be planned and built today makes this a reality. And of course, with some of the government programs that have been introduced for the private sector has an opportunity right now to make this kind of project a reality. So just very quickly, in terms of what does the capital look like in terms of one of these projects, often what we try and do for our customers is to make sure that we find any of the capital cost reductions that come from grants and incentives. Then we go to an organization like the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, which brings low interest, long-term debt to the project, which then means we can go back out to the standard debt providers. We can top up the debt that comes into these projects, much like you get a first mortgage, and that's how the Canada Infrastructure Bank operates. Is if you have another debt provider in these kind of projects, it's the infrastructure bank that sits as the second mortgage holder, and the other debt equity holder sits as the first mortgage holder. So you can get good terms and interest rates from the standard capital providers. And then Ameresco and our capital partners basically add the equity component that need to come into the project. And as mentioned earlier, it's the monthly fees that are paid by the owner of these properties that fund this, that fund the capital throughout the life of the project. So one of the things that this particular model brings in that's new and outside of what would happen for a standard performance contract is we need to perform the operation and maintenance for these particular projects because, of course, we own the assets. We need to make sure we can guarantee the outputs and they're monitored and maintained properly. Anything that goes offside needs to be fixed quickly because we're on the hook for making sure that those performance metrics stay in place. We want to make sure that the maintenance is strictly adhered to for the maximum life cycle of the capital we put in place. And the other thing too is over the life of the contract, we're in a position where if there are more efficient technologies that can come into play, we can actually include that throughout the life of the contract. And then lastly, in terms of making sure we can optimize our participation in the ISO grid here in Ontario, we need to be able to make sure that we're monitoring what's happening with on-site generation and loads so that we can maximize the revenue that we can actually bring to the school board. And that's something that I know John's interested in. And one of the novel parts of this project is both Ameresco and the school board have opportunities to earn revenue as a result of the excess energy we send back to the grid. And with that, I'll hand it back to John.
Thanks, Jim. Being that the JP2 project is an energy as a service contract, I'd like to speak to all 5 points here on this slide. Others, previous slides, I just kind of let it go because they're somewhat self-explanatory, but from our school board point of view, I think it's important for us to explain and to table why is important for Ameresco to do the O&M. So the first one, the operational cost savings. It allows the building owner to eliminate any additional costs for human resources due to budget constraints, which also includes new training for staff and ongoing future training costs. Public organizations such as school boards have limited budgets due to restricted funding allocations. The expertise. Since Ameresco designs, builds, and can operate their own systems, the next logical progression is that they monitor the mechanical system on a continuous basis to attain optimal operation. If there is a system failure, they will know immediately. This becomes extremely beneficial regarding a turnkey system. In organizations like public school boards, the internal expertise just does not exist to complete comprehensive energy efficient projects that reduce carbon footprint for an organization. Ongoing maintenance costs. Since public funded organizations have limited and restricted funding, the required maintenance costs can be properly and systematically planned on a short-term and long-term basis, instead of taking a reactionary approach which exists in many public organizations. I've been with school boards for a long period of time, and I can assure you that due to the lack of funding that school boards receive, a lot of the approach is reactionary. The result to planned maintenance is less breakdowns, continuity for the building occupants, and consistent, comfortable environments. Capital equipment replacement. When a third party like Ameresco completes an EPC or a similar agreement, they will include in the project scope replacement of capital equipment which is nearing its life expectancy with new energy efficient equipment that provides significant reduction in energy costs, lowers the building carbon footprint, and subsequently provides long-term cost avoidance solutions for the building owner. Jim mentioned earlier in his presentation that school boards simply just don't have those type of funds. There's a significant gap in funding from the ministry to renew assets such as mechanical aspects of a school building. The organizational focus. With a turnkey solution, excuse me, with a turnkey solution provided by someone like Ameresco, agreements can include the performance guarantees. As such, this allows building owners to focus on their main thing, In the case of public school boards, it is viewed that the facilities department can focus on supporting the academic educational needs of a school system instead of trying to transform school buildings seeking energy savings, carbon reductions, and other type of organizational objectives. The project lessons we learned. The JP2 project was the first of its kind for the London District Catholic School Board. We have completed in our school board many projects worth tens of millions of dollars that are related to energy savings, but none like the JP2 project. We've done projects that result in a reduction of our carbon footprint, and we've learned a lot from each of these endeavors. When we started on our journey to convert JP2 into a carbon-free facility, we were surprised that our local municipal hydro agency was somewhat reluctant and hesitant to jump on board. They advised that their infrastructure grid could not accommodate the additional electricity produced by the microgrid at JP2 that we desired to redirect back into the municipal grid for revenue generation. They had more questions than answers. However, as time went on, I do believe our municipal hydro agency began to realize the benefits that the JP2 project brought to the community, while recognizing that the JP2 carbon facility was the first of its kind, and they subsequently then supported our project with an unwavering commitment. Putting aside the typical delays in equipment and material deliveries, I do believe that one of the lessons we learned that in order to complete a project like JP2, the building owner requires to pick a project partner that not only can, but will fulfill their responsibilities in a timely manner to the project. Commitment, transparency, and proven excellent engineering are a must. As mentioned previously, school boards are a public funded entity and funding is prescriptive. Unfortunately, there is not an abundance of funds, and it is very obvious from the start that this project was one that the London District Catholic School Board could not achieve on its own. In order for the JP2 project to move forward from the drawing board to reality, we required what I call out-of-the-box financial thinking. This was achieved by way of a long-term agreement with Ameresco and the financial funding that was received through Natural Resources Canada. Our school board was fortunate to be chosen one of the three projects out of some 100 submissions that Natural Resources received for these innovative technologies and engineering in the field of green energy. As partners, the board, along with Ameresco, presented a vision. That vision became the JP2 carbon-free embedded microgrid system. And our initial FEED study proved that this project could be successfully completed. And now, as previously mentioned, we're officially set to receive our notice of commercial operation. We have achieved our objective in so many different ways, and we're proud to officially be the first carbon-free embedded utility in Canada.
Very good. Thank you, John and Jim. This was excellent. And I see we've received a few questions in the chat, one in the Q&A. I know, Max, you were going to direct some of them.
Yeah.
Is there some you'd like to pass along?
Yeah, I think a quick one, and it will take Jim probably 15 seconds, is one of the questions relates to where the investments, are they before or after the meter? So in terms of that separation between the building and the electricity generation from this project.
Sure. All of the investments that we make in the project are actually behind the meter. So there is a significant amount of technology that we have that allows us to seamlessly synchronize, to couple and decouple with the grid at will or during periods of electrical outages. But obviously all of that sits behind the London Hydro meter.
That's what I thought, but I didn't want to, I wanted to make 100% sure by talking to the specialists. So Here's another question that's probably very interesting. I'm interested in hearing the answer as well. And it's asked, how long did it take to gather and analyze the needs of the school before actual implementation of the energy project? So I think, how long did it take Ameresco, once you had that partnership, to figure out what you have built?
Boy, John, I mean, I think we started this process, I'm going to say back in 2017. If not, it was 2018. And I think one of the advantages that we had on this particular project, and I'll let John step in here, is we had, Ameresco had done a fair amount of work in this school. When we went to John with this concept, it was a matter of saying, okay, this is the opportunity. We have this opportunity from Natural Resources Canada, which would be the best candidate based on the knowledge that we had. And I think some of the work that we'd done before kind of moved around JP2. But in terms of us, doing the FEED study that we had to organize in order to move forward on this project, it took us about a year to complete. I don't know, John, if you want to add to that.
I would just add that, as you said, Jim, we chose JP2 because of the fact that Ameresco had completed on our behalf a considerable amount of work over many years. So we had numerous audits that were already completed for the school. It's also one of our secondary facilities that is utilized the most by the community. So in our discussions, we said, okay, Ameresco has been in so many of our schools, but this one seems to jump out at us. And it was my decision to choose this school for the past history, its location, as I mentioned earlier, where it's on two major roads in the city of London at an intersection, whereas some of our other high schools do not have that same curb appeal and presence that JP2 does. So it probably took us a number of months before we decided to pick JP2. And then once we did, we started working on the FEED study that we had to complete for Natural Resources Canada in order to prove that this was a doable project. And that, as Jim said, it was 2017 that we started. By 2018, we were full mode into the FEED study. And then by the end of that year, we went to Ottawa together to make our presentation before they determined whether we would be one of the finalists chosen out of the 100 some odd submissions that they received.
Thanks, John. And conscientious of time, because I want to make sure Danny has time to close out. We've got 4 more minutes for questions. So there's one more question from the panel, and I will ask that one. But I'd like, John, are you planning to do a similar project in one of your other schools? Is it already on the books to try to replicate this in another of your facilities?
This has been discussed quite a bit in depth, Max, to do this with a new facility. We currently have funding from the ministry to complete 2 new elementary schools in North London. We have already sat down with Ameresco to engage them into doing an energy as a service agreement again. It may not be the full-blown likes of JP2, but it will be very similar. And again, the reason why I say it won't be exactly as JP2 is because it is smaller. The elementary school we're talking about will have a school population of about 500. So we definitely talked about solar arrays, battery storage, producing enough electricity to put it back into the grid. The only thing that we may do different in this one is not utilize a in-ground heat pump system, but to do it through, an in-ground geothermal system, but to do it through a heat pump design.
Excellent. Thanks, John. And one more question, because someone asked a question, it's been a while, and now all these questions are coming in now when we have 1 minute. Probably Jim, maybe myself, is one of the questions was, does a high security or containment complex, must be a colleague of mine from Correctional Services or D&D, can this be replicated at another campus style environment, not just a school, maybe a penitentiary or military base?
Absolutely. I mean, it can be replicated everywhere. That's one of the reasons we like this particular project. Obviously, security measures, how the project is deployed, what needs to be included around the project to ensure its safety moving forward. All of those things are facility specific. But in terms of the energy service and providing the energy on site, all of this is very doable. Especially at properties that have lots of space, as there is at JP2.
I'm not going to ask another question because it's 57, and I know that Danny has to take over. And all these questions came in afterwards. So maybe Danny, is there an opportunity for us to maybe take a stab at these questions offline and share it with the community at a later date? Is that a possibility? I don't know.
We can definitely take a look at that. For sure, and see what we can do in terms of posting some responses or circling back directly to the folks who asked those questions. But what a fantastic session. Thank you again to Ameresco for sponsoring today's webinar, and of course to our incredible speakers, so John Kanoniak and Jim Fonger, and our wonderful moderator, Max St. Denis. So this was really informative. Thank you to all of the ARPIC volunteers for supporting this event, and of course to our generous annual sponsors, our public sector sustaining partner, PSPC, our private sector sustaining partners, Colliers Project Leaders and Tyree Facility Solutions, and Horizon Inc., and our private sector supporting partner, AECOM, and our public sector supporting partner, Canada Lands Company. Finally, thank you to all of you for attending and being a part of the conversation. We encourage you to visit the ARPIC website to get more information on our upcoming events. And thank you to all of you for being a part of ARPIC, and we will see you next time.